You know, it's now possible for a young man to look at more beautiful nude women in one day than any man has ever seen, you know, prior to 10 years ago, 20 years ago, than any man in history had ever seen. That's not nothing. That's something. And to think that doesn't do anything to you, it's like, no, that likely does something to you.
So you mentioned pornography. What I've noticed that happens sometimes is because of years of watching pornography, the men's sexual attraction becomes warped. How can that man go back to now being attracted to, you know, more natural looking women or more women that could be around their, you know,
well, deprivation is helpful. I think it's reasonable to assume that there's a novelty edge in pornography, like there is in so many quasi-addictive phenomena. Because novelty is a sexual kick, it has to stay novel, and that means that over time it's going to become more extreme. So that's not good. Well, so how do you resensitize yourself in some sense? Well, you stop, and then hopefully you recover, and then you deprive yourself of that outlet, let's say. And you might say, well, you know, is that absolutely necessary? And maybe there's nothing wrong with pornography. It's like, well, I don't know, man. Like, have you ever really met a guy who is proud of that? And to me, that's an indication that, yeah, we know. No, it's pretty cheap. It's cheap. It's easy. And don't underestimate the utility of deprivation. What do we need to drive us forward to have the adventure of our life? You know, some deprivation, that's for sure. That heightens desire and drive. And maybe you need that. You're afraid to approach a woman. Well, you remove part of your drive with pornography. So now you don't have that sexual urge to overcome that anxiety. And so you stay timid for your entire life. If you're masturbating to pornography and the consequence of that is an immediate influx of guilt, then you have to ask yourself, who's in control? And that's a really important question, who's in control? That's what terrified me. You realize that you're a house that many spirits can and do inhabit, and that many of them aren't you, and that many of them aren't working towards the purposes you might want yourself to be working to. And that's the realization of the myth that you're embodying from the Jungian perspective. If your behavior is embarrassing you, well, there's only two possibilities, isn't there? You shouldn't be so embarrassed. The voice that says yes to all expression of human sexuality would say that your guilt and shame is merely the detrimental hangover of an oppressive patriarchy that's judgmental in its attitudes towards sexuality. You have to consult your own conscience. Like, I know the conscience can become an oppressive force on its own. That's the indwelling of the great tyrant. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that there was some relationship between the sexual revolution of the 1960s, which, according to Randy Thornhill, the world's top biological thinker on this particular topic, Thornhill believed that the liberalism of the 60s was a consequence, at least, and in large part, hygienic revolution of the previous 6 decades and more that enabled us to reduce the impact, at least in the West, of infectious diseases. We were much less prone to the transmission and receipt of infectious diseases. We could afford to be more liberal by the 1960s. So we got more sexually liberal. And what happened? AIDS. And I say that without prejudice. What's the most effective means of facilitating the reproduction of a deadly virulent agent and its propagation through the population? Unrestrained sexual behavior. And so that would be a multitude of partners. Sexual shame is there for a reason. It's not just going to go away because we may wave the magic wand and make the patriarchal oppressor vanish. And that's not going to happen. If you're ashamed about your sexual behavior, then you have to ask yourself, is the shame wrong or is the sexual behavior wrong? And I'm asking you, this is on you. Is your shame what you should be dispensing with, or the behavior? And, you know, it might be a little of column A and a little of column B, because life is never simple. If you don't feel ennobled by your porn-related masturbation, then perhaps that means it's of questionable utility. I don't see it as something people do in public and brag about. Sexual behavior is private and should remain that way. I think people shouldn't lie, especially to themselves. Repeatedly engaging in a behavior that you judge yourself to be morally reprehensible is a form of performative contradiction, which is the acting out of a lie. You know, what should you do with pornography? Everyone knows it's not good. It's not good for those who produce it, It's not good for those who participate wittingly or unwittingly, because there's plenty of them, in its production. It's not good for its consumers. Certainly not the highest good. And what's the highest good? Sexuality incorporated within a functional, intimate relationship, bound by vows of mutual celibacy. That stabilizes our families. It stabilizes our societies. It stabilizes our psyches. And so anything you do that isn't in service of that goal is likely to be counterproductive. And I suspect it's your own psyche, your own soul telling you that. If your sexual behavior isn't an expression of your highest being, it isn't serving you in the deepest sense. You're serving it. And that's what your shame indicates. Get out there and find a partner and commit to her or him. And do you have any advice on what to do with porn and masturbation? The less porn, the better. But let's make that more specific. To the degree that porn and masturbation is undermining your sense of yourself and providing you with a dearth of motivational reasons to get out there and engage with a real partner, then it's definitely not in your best interest, and that's what your conscience is telling you. It's the expedient at the expense of the meaningful. There isn't any more obvious manifestation of the expedient at the expense of the meaningful than pornography and masturbation. That's hardly a heroic path. So maybe the less of it, the better. It isn't that you're trying to quit porn. It's not the right way to think about it. The right way to think about it is that you're trying to figure out how to have a better life. What your life could be like in 3 to 5 years if you took care of yourself like you were someone that you cared for. About how good your life could be in 3 to 5 years if you got your act together and did what was good for you. What the hell you could be in if you didn't. Porn isn't the issue. The issue is that you're not living your life the way you want to. And so you need a vision that's more compelling than the porn. And you need a counter vision too that frightens you. Porn is obviously extraordinarily gratifying in the short term. You seem to be suffering from the medium to long-term consequences of its use. And so you need a story that you can tell yourself that's really deeply thought through why this is not appropriate for you, how it's hurting you and how it's minimizing you and perhaps making you embarrassed and ashamed and more socially isolated. Think about it as cleaning up your psyche and your behavior rather than merely stopping. You got to write down everything bad that you think porn is doing to you, because obviously you have some suspicions that this is not good for you. It's a very good idea to identify one of your weaknesses and work on it. It's actually harming you in some important way. And so you need to be fully cognizant of what those ways are. You can strengthen yourself substantially by doing that. And then take them seriously and decide if that's the pathway through life on which you wish to travel. And then I would also say good luck to you.